Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Okay, I'm here with nRated, ex-fnatic, now EG analyst / sub. So, okay, actually the first place I wanted to start with you was when you were in AAA, Against All Authority, because most people actually don't remember this period of your career, because the problem with the AAA lineup was they had the lineup that came second at Season 1 Championship, and everyone's like, oh, I remember that, even if they don't remember the lineup really. But then the team after that was the one where like people remember it like underperforming, and then people just remember some of the AAA members ended up in fnatic. Well, and in fact, one of your own teammates, when I did an interview with them, I think mistakenly said something like that you'd played in the Season 1 finals against them. So even they didn't remember the AAA lineup, you know. And so what I wanted to ask was, the big event for you when you were in AAA was the IEM World Championships. And so at this event, your team actually, from what I remember from looking into like the context of the time, it was actually a surprise to a lot of people that your team came fourth, like made top 4 and had like a shot at maybe higher. Was it actually a surprise at the time for your team and for like the community? Do you think this is like accurate?
I think for us it was a really big disappointment. We rated ourselves very high at that point. We were having constant scrims and games versus M5 back in the days, and we were like the only team that really constantly beat them. Like they really struggled playing against us. We knew how they play and the way they thought, so we just analyzed what they were doing and we completely countered it. Like any position of us at that time was basically ahead of theirs. We managed to beat them successfully in so many games, but we struggled playing against we didn't actually never play them offline. So we didn't have the possibility to prove that. But I think we were ahead of them in that time. They simply were better against other teams and they did better researches. Coming to IEM World Finals there at CBIT in Hanover, we played against Dignitas and CLG, and we literally had no point of researching.
Oh, okay.
So we came into the game barely blind. We knew about what they're playing and how they're playing, but we didn't really have an opportunity to find out like how to counter that. And they had a lot more things to do versus us. They knew what to ban and they played really properly against us. And I think back in that time, Voyboy did a really great job at shutting down Source, and we were not prepared for that because our gameplay was a bit reliant on him as well.
So actually, just to go on to what you were saying there about Moscow 5, because that's interesting, because the key thing is the official storyline of history as it will be written now is that no one could figure out Moscow 5. They were so amazing, they were beating everyone. They hadn't even like lost the map to most people until CLG beat them. Okay, so people think, okay, so CLG was the counter to them, but you're saying like in scrims at least you were beating them. You seemed like you had a good counter to them. Thinking of like the style that they were making famous and the invading the enemy jungle and stuff, what was the like approach that AAA used that was successful against them then? What was like the secret to beating them then?
I think Linek as a jungle is a really beast, or he was a beast. Okay. He was one of the best jungles, if not the best jungle in the world back then. I think most of our gameplay was reliant on him. He set up the ganks, he was doing a really great job at that, and he was split pushing and getting really farmed in those games. We managed to hold them 4 versus 5 at any point, and they didn't really have a possibility to get advantage by that, and we always gained and gained and gained. And by that split push, we just were able to take towers down, take global objectives, and we just overall like played our game instead of theirs, and they were not prepared for it. Plus that Linek straight up beat Diamond 1-on-1, and he was not counter jungling against us. We were rather counter jungling against them, invading a lot.
And you mentioned there you played Dignitas and you played CLG. I have a question actually about CLG, since you played them in the group stage. That's another thing that people remember, okay. Most of the teams, Moscow 5 did pretty much roll over when they were in the playoffs, etc. But people always remember the CLG game they played in the semi-final as like, people always thought maybe that was one of the teams who could have beaten them. Because in the first game, it looked like CLG was going to win, and then like they sort of threw the game and Moscow 5 came back and won, and then still won the whole tournament. Was that CLG team as good as that storyline makes them out to be? Were they just suited to the Moscow 5 style? What do you think of it?
We went into the match, we were completely cocky, saying it the least. We were coming into the match and we had the backline like, we are really strong at the moment and we will beat them. That was our main idea. And we came into the game and they surprised us. They played a game that we were not able to hold. They were split pushing us, they were doing a lot more than we were ever thought they would ever do. Like, we just didn't expect them to play it the way they played, and by that they just countered our playstyle a lot.
That was the period of time when they had this bottom lane that they actually have now again, the Doublelift Chauster bottom lane, and because of the time period that they had it, there's all these stories about them. Oh, it was, you know, they never lost the lane. It was just unbeatable. It was the best in the whole world. But you got to play against them. You're obviously a support player, and you must have seen them since, I guess, since you're a guy who watches replays, etc. What did you actually think of the bot lane? Like, what were the strengths of it? Was it really that dominant?
We were beating them early. Like, we were beating them, I would say. We were not out-farming them. I don't know how Doublelift made that. He was barely missing any CS. At any point, we was always keeping up in CS. We managed to kill them in the group stage game 2 times, but he still got ahead of us by farming, which was for us incredible because Yellowstar was simply out-farming any other AD back in that time. Like, he was just straight up 1v1 out-farming anyone, and Doublelift made it. The Doublelift just made it and farmed more than him, and we didn't really have an answer for that. And they protected him very, very well in team fights, and we didn't manage to catch up to him. And by that, their team play was just outstanding to other teams. I think Doublelift himself was very hard to catch, but we managed to catch him a couple of times off guard, and that's why we killed him. But compared to other ADs back then, he had such a big edge on anyone.
Because then, like, basically the result that the storyline goes, the result that broke AAA up was you go to this IPL 4, you play a CLG again, you lose them. Okay, that's fine, CLG's a top team. But then you play this team Monomaniac, and at the time, everyone was like, who the fuck are they? But now, the funny thing is, 2 of them actually are in LCS now, so like Spartan Guy and Nintendo X, these players are actually now known as LCS players. At the time, were they really just like, did you really like think, who even are these guys? You thought, we're going to win that game for sure. The next game, was it really like that?
I can quote Linek there when we lost versus them. I think that was the downfall of us as well. We played really, really bad against any team we played in IPL, basically, because we were just struggling to... I don't know, we were struggling against any American team we played back then. I cannot really say a reason for it, because it was just different play styles, different teams, and we were struggling against each one of them. When we lost, Linek was saying we lost against those boys because they were very underaged at that time, and we felt going there as like the seniors coming with a lot of experience, and we came against a team that we've barely known, barely any heard of or whatever, and lost versus them. They're playing good, they're really good players, and I think all of them had the potential to come into any professional team, and I think that they did it now. They're playing in LCS as well. But back then it broke our neck a bit. Like, it took confidence of us, and we were just struggling to take that defeat on our shoulders and just keep on going. And we like kind of broke apart from that point on. Like, basically we wanted to dedicate more into it because we were saying that coming from IPL with such a loss cannot be bared, and we need to improve, and that can only be done with more practice, which means we need to dedicate more time. And Moma was doing a lot of studies back then, and he was just simply not able to put more time into it. He already did as much as he could. So we decided to pick up another mid laner, and that basically broke our neck, because our game was very dependent of Moma as well, and his personal playstyle and his just general mechanical skill that he had. So I think that was the point where we started to really struggle and just slowly but surely break apart.
So like I mentioned, if the public just looks at the results, they'll think, okay, well, the IEM result was fine for AAA, okay, bad result here. But like you were mentioning, actually, I've heard from other pros and other members of that same lineup, online you were in theory like tearing everyone up, and you all thought you're going to do so well at these offline events, and so that's like a really bad lineup. The lineup breaks up. Then some of the players went and basically made Millennium, which is like a similar team, and they had the same problem actually, where they went to an American event straight after, and they bombed out again. In fact, to the same players, it's amazingly in the same fashion, SOAS and those guys. And so you trialed for Millennium later. You didn't like stay in the team properly as an official member. Did you ever worry around this period, like maybe my League of Legends career is over, like maybe I'm never going to find a top team again? Was this ever a concern?
I never thought so, because I considered myself ahead of other supports at that time, like so far ahead that...
Why? What was it about your game?
I have no idea. I've never considered myself a support beforehand. I was playing any other role. I was playing AD, jungle, even top lane, but I was not actually considering myself a support. I was not playing support in solo queue either. I was subbing for AAA in a tournament where their support back then, Osaft, was not able to attend. Okay. It was just an online event. I think it was a Go for Low finals, and I didn't even really think of what I was gonna play. But I managed to pick up Genja and Leona, I think, as champions, and I did so well with Yellowstar that they said that the difference that it made that I played was so big that they needed to pick me up just because they saw an opportunity to improve themselves. And I don't know why I did stuff that I was I was playing AD before, so I had a really clue about what is going on in the lane and what am I supposed to do. And I was just like, I was thinking myself into the AD role, and I was thinking of, okay, what if I was the AD now, what would I want my support to do? So I was always looking for aggression, I was zoning them, I was always like doing one step towards them instead of just staying in the brush and waiting for the AD to last hit. And back then, like, almost no one did that. So I was able to just simply outsmart them by just doing 3 steps towards them. They always thought I was engaging, but I was actually not doing it. So they lost, let's say, 2 or 3 CS. And the next step I did, I engaged. And this time they didn't see it coming, so they didn't make a back move or whatever. And I just caught them every single time. Either they lose CS or I caught them. That was basically the main playstyle I had back in that time. And I just slowly but surely found into the role, because I was never a support player in that time, but I just slowly grew into it.
So when you joined Fnatic, okay, this was actually the dark period for Fnatic where they were struggling, they started to change players, but they were still looking for a good lineup. Then you have this event, the regional finals, okay. Now, I've heard these questions asked to all the Fnatic members, right, in the same way over and over, like, oh, shouldn't you have been at the finals? What did you think of it? Like, would you have beaten SK if you'd have played them in the 3rd place game? All this stuff. So I need you to tell me this. I'm going to set it up in the proper way, okay, but I need you to give me the no bullshit version, okay? So not just what you wish happened, but really, like, how good were these teams really? Because every team always says when they lose, but they could have won and they should have won, and you know. So in the semi-finals, you play Moscow 5. You have a chance to win this match, maybe, because you win a map. Okay, so the possibility to win there. So first of all, I want to know what realistically was the chance to actually beat Moscow 5 in that match, not in terms of how good the teams were. And then, in the 3rd place game, you have to play CLG because they get amazingly upset by SK. If you really had played SK in the 3rd case match, would you have beaten them? So these two questions. I need the no bullshit version though.
M5, really strong team. Best team in Europe by far, uncontested in my eyes. They had just they got stuff up that was meta like months later. Like they just knew things about the game that others just simply didn't even consider to be there or whatever. I think they had a slight edge on anyone, if not a huge edge. So when we came into the match, we were not terrified, but we came into the match with a lot of respect. We prepared very well, and I think the second match we did, we outplayed them. That's why we won. Not because we were the better team, but because we outplayed them in a situation and we knew what to do afterwards. Okay. They were better. I think beating them was possible, but very unlikely. And getting a map of them was all we could achieve at that point. Okay. Going into the match versus CLG, aka SK at that point, I think if we managed to go versus SK,
yeah,
we would have won. Straight up, we played them a lot of times and we knew how they're playing. They were well prepared, no doubt, but we scrimmed them a lot. We knew what they were gonna do. We bootcamped before and we were as much prepared as they were, and I think back then we were the better team.
Okay, because this is what is interesting to me, okay, because the fact that Fnatic didn't make it to that Season 2 finals means that the storyline is very easy for, like, if it was a movie, it'd be like, okay, that's when they failed, and then what they needed was that one missing piece, and if they just had the missing piece, then they could have been a real, and so then, oh, Rekkles guy just comes out of nowhere, and oh, he must be the whole reason why. That was like the storyline. People who were fans were like, Rekkles was obviously talented, and so they saw him playing and they go, oh, he's the reason why they're doing so well. So you beat CLG, you win DreamHack, you go to IPL 5, you have this really good result. Realistically, now you're not in the team, you're not going to play with Rekkles again. So how much of him being in the team and the team having success was him joining and the role he played, but then how much was also the fact that maybe because we didn't get to see you at the Season 2, we never got to see really how good that Fnatic lineup was? Like, give me the balance of the two.
I think as an AD carry, Rekkles has insane mechanical skills, comparable to Doublelift, if not better. I think on that point at IPL, for example, his mechanical skills were the same. He was as good as Doublelift in my eyes. A lot of what we did with Rekkles was because he had a lot of mechanical skills and we could rely on them. He was not failing, he was very fail-proof. in any scenario he could farm. He was able to, even with disadvantage, he was able to stay on a point where he was strong enough to carry if he gets some kills. And I think a lot of the gameplay that we had was a bit reliant on him. I think when he came into the team, he had no knowledge of the game. Like he knew his role, but he didn't know the overall role or how he was supposed to play it out. And a lot of what happened there was only because we managed to push him into the point where he was at IPL. I think he had a lot of impact, but we were a really strong team before. And Lamia was a really good AD carry positioning wise and in team fights, but his laning phase was really off. Like we were struggling because Lamia was not able to CS a lot of times. And if you compare Lamia to Rekkles, I think both were really good in team fights, but Rekkles was able to farm, Lamia wasn't. So with Rekkles we even got an even more edge over other teams, and I think we were really strong at that point, really solid, and picking up Rekkles made us even more solid because we had a consistent AD carry on our side.
Okay, so this is a topic I wanted to bring up, the Doublelift versus Rekkles argument, because it was actually like a big fan discussion at the time. And the funny thing is, it wasn't just fans, players themselves got involved and said what they thought. And so I have two different versions. I have the versions I heard from you and the versions I heard from the CLG players. So I'll put it this way. To make it harsh to begin with, I want to put to you the CLG version of why they think Doublelift for sure was better than Rekkles. And it goes like this, and there is a logic to it, okay? So Chauster and Doublelift say the reason why Doublelift is clearly superior as an AD is because if you think of that team that they were playing in there with Hotshot GG playing top lane, like Big Fat LP playing the mid lane, who's like maybe a bit past his time at that point, you know, they have some weaknesses in the team. They don't have very many threats, and Doublelift has to sort of carry the game for them to win the game. Meanwhile, you look at the fnatic lineup, and this is almost complimentary of your team, even though it's Chauster and those guys. And they're saying, well, xPeke is a world-class mid player, Soaz is a world-class top laner. So yeah, Rekkles is good, but he has other threats and he has world-class players with him. So he doesn't have to do as much for fnatic to win. Is there anything to this? Like, do they have a point?
Well, the point is their entire team play is surrounded by him. They give him resources. They push the farm onto him. They rather give up farm for someone else and give it to him in order for him to build up damage and be strong. I think that's a similar playstyle to a lot of Chinese teams that are playing. So when it comes to that, I think Doublelift had a lot of resources that Rekkles did not have. So that's not a point for Rekkles being worse than him. It's more like just a general team play thing. I think Doublelift and Rekkles are both outstanding AD carries. I would have never said that any one of them is worse than the other one, but if you compare them, I think there was not a big edge on any one of them. Okay. With two threats, playing with two threats, top and mid, Rekkles was, yeah, it was not easy for him to shine as well. While you see that with two passive lanes from top and mid, it was not very hard for Doublelift to shine out in the team. If he played outstanding, he was looking like that. Like you saw that he was playing better and he had a stronger impact than the other AD carry because he got more resources and because the main focus of the team was on him. While for us, the focus was not clearly on Rekkles. Like if he got fed, we managed to protect him and rather played that play style. But we never aimed for him getting fed in any game and tried to carry it. It was more like he's stealing the damage, and if he gets fed, we will be able to protect him and he will carry us. So it's just two different playstyles. I think from that point we cannot judge who's the better AD carry, and a straight up comparison is almost not possible, but depending on the games we've played, I think from that point on Rekkles was at least the same level as Doublelift.
So when I looked into the interview that you did at the time, actually at IPL 5, I actually then sort of could see why the CLG players would even want to bring this discussion up, you know, because you didn't just say, oh, we played them and we did well against them in scrims. You said we raped them. When we played CLG.NA and scrims before IPL 5, we were just owning them completely. Was it really just this bad? Like, were you winning against them in the bottom lane as well?
First up, I should have never said raped. I didn't know it has a bad meaning. We won them. We won them very successfully. Even 2-on-2 matchups, we just won them. There was more about us two beating them in scrims, but there was more response to what Doublelift said in an interview before, saying that Rekkles is not good and that his Vayne is not good either. So I was more like a rage standing of it. I should have maybe not done that. I think they're both very good. Like Chauster and Chauster-Doublelift at that time were really one of the best bot lanes. And I think we were playing really solid as well. So coming up against each other, we just managed to beat them in scrims. I'm not sure if we were the better bot lane. I'm actually questioning that. But overall, we were playing good enough to compete with them, and we managed to beat them in several scrims. So there was a point where I said, okay, I don't understand why he makes that statement if we managed to beat them in scrims.
The strange thing about the IPL 5 event for your team is that what people will forget, if someone looks back now, it always seems really obvious, like, oh, if they came second, they were obviously one of the best, you know, everyone knew they were one of the best. What people forget was the real storyline when you won DreamHack Winter wasn't fnatic won DreamHack Winter. It was like, how did CLG EU lose the Winter? They were supposed to win it. It was supposed to be like a not even many good teams at the event. They go there, they win, they go live. Whoa, wait a minute, they lost. So then when you go to IPL 5, suddenly people are still surprised that you're doing well. And in fact, you beat everyone basically except World Elite. So taking World Elite out of the equation for a minute, what was it about your team that made you versus all the rest of the field, like Blaze, TPA? How were you just so like dominant and just beating everyone except World Elite?
Well, we had a bootcamp straight before DreamHack, and that was basically our main preparation for IPL as well. We were playing 10 to 12 hours a day, as much as we could against any team we found, trying out every playstyle we could, trying out different combos, and we managed to pull out stuff that never anyone saw of us. So it was like, I know a lot of Asian teams and so on, like, do their preparation. Coming into matches, they look at matches, they look at habits, and we basically changed everything before the matches. So DreamHack, you could tell a bit about how we play, but it was not like anyone could have done a lot of researches on what we have prepared in our bags. And we didn't really show a lot of ordinary play when we were in group stage as well. So coming to the semis, TPA didn't have material to go to look up what to play against us, and we had fairly a lot to watch from their games. So we went into the matches better prepared and beat them. Like, part of it was we were beating them because of that, and we had a lot of practice in our back when we came there.
So as I mentioned, you beating everyone, you looked awesome, but then there was one team, World Elite, and you went something like 2-8 against them, or 2-6 or something. Let me think what it was. Yeah, it was 2-6, okay. So they were the only team that beat you up, but then they beat everyone up in that tournament. And for many months, people hailed them like they're the best team in the whole world, okay. What was so good about World Elite?
I think it was 2-5. They had one match up in the finals because we came from the lower bracket.
Okay.
They actually beat us 5 times, but really 5 times, like not even slightly. They were playing very, very strong. They were just playing consistent. They didn't make mistakes. At that time, we were looking for mistakes and forced mistakes. We pushed out the lane and tried to group and saw what they were doing and how they were behaving. And depending on that, we could have made a move to punish positioning, to punish any kind of mistake they are doing. So we were trying to force that against them, and it was simply not working. They were not doing those mistakes. They were being careful. They read our game very well, and that's why it was very hard to play against them. We didn't ban properly the first games we played against them. We didn't really know them that much. We were going to the match very respectful, and the more we played them, the more we opened up and said, okay, all or nothing, trying everything we can and just doing what we can. But back then, I think their AD carry was outstanding. Wei Zhao was better than anyone. I don't know how, but he managed to do stuff that no one else could back at that time. We had a really good team play, but they had a really good team play as well. Like, I think we were very, very equal, and just similar mistakes that we did and they didn't cost us games.
So after this event, you had this IEM Cologne event not too long afterwards, where you got to play some Koreans. And these weren't like the ultra top level Koreans, but they were like the ones just below. So it was the SK Telecom lineup, who we now know with Reapered, who isn't actually in SK Telecom anymore, and the CJ Entus lineup, who weren't actually that famous. And this isn't Frost or Blades for anyone watching now, but a lot of those players have since gone on to bigger things like inSec, Dade, and stuff. These guys, like, quite good players. You beat the CJ Entus ones, you beat SK in the group, but then the SK Telecom beat you in the final though. So at the time, you hadn't really played many Koreans, you just played Blaze basically. How good actually were the Koreans, like, compare them to the Chinese team, the World Elite, or the players at IPL 5, and like, how good were the actual teams and how good was like the wins over them?
World Elite was barely unbeatable. The Koreans were manageable.
Okay, in what sense?
The way they played offered us opportunities to do something, and we forced them into mistakes, and they were often doing them. like their gameplay was not as consistent as the Chinese team was in that time. I think they were good. They were doing many moves that we've never expected. For example, insect farming up the jungle, getting stronger than anyone in the game basically. Is like, that was stuff that we didn't expect to happen, and it happened in several games. And we, first of all, we were struggling against it, but in the end we just like, we grouped up and we didn't give them the opportunity to split push that much. And I think we were one of the only teams in that time that really had an answer for split push and knew what to do when someone tries to go on a side lane and pushes. And we were consistently forcing fights, and then at a certain point they were struggling. We were pushing them out of their comfort zone, forcing them into mistakes, and we were just punishing them for every single one of them. So against the CJ Entus lineup at that time, I think they had a really slight edge over us as well, but we managed to beat them in 2 games because we got Rekkles fed. That was the only reason we won versus them, was because we got Rekkles fed by punishing mistakes again. That was the general idea of going against Koreans, was not holding a game, but aggress them as much as possible to force mistakes. Playing against them with respect would have led into a situation where they out-farm you, where they outplay you, and at a certain point they just overwhelm you because they have more resources on their side.
So after that was when you had to get rid of Rekkles because of the age limit, and so you brought in Yellowstar, an old teammate. Now, the obvious way to ask this question would be to just ask what changed with him, how was it different from him, but instead I have a different way I want to ask about it. Was the key pattern I noticed was at the IEM Katowice event, the first one you had him in, you played Blaze, and you lost to Blaze here, and Blaze was one of the teams you'd beaten at IPL, admittedly on one map. Was there, instead of telling me about the Fnatic side of things, is there something that had changed about Blaze? Because this was also the period where it wasn't that long afterwards that they won the IEM World Championship. They even beat their sister team Frost, so it seems like that was them on the rise. Like, had something changed about their team and how good they were, or how they played?
I think they committed a lot less mistakes. Like, not a lot less, but they committed less mistakes that we were able to punish. And also we didn't have, I think Yellowstar to Rekkles, if in straight comparison, I think the mechanical skills of Rekkles were just 1 or 2 steps ahead of Yellowstar at that time. So when you compared them, the CSing was like, at a certain point, Rekkles would have had 20 CS more, which means like barely 1 item. It's like, and maybe he would have positioned a bit different in team fights as well. I think our team play also changed because we had to put up a new player into the team and had to try to make that work. And we didn't have as much preparation for IEM Katowice than we had for the other events. For IPL and for DreamHack, we just had like a huge practice in the background. And for Katowice, we practiced as well, no doubt, but it was just not comparable, the time amount we spent there. I think Yellowstar overall was a really good pickup for us in that time, and because of him we were able to compete with them, but we were not able to beat them because they improved and we barely stayed the same.
So the thing is, now I want to talk about Fnatic with Yellowstar and with an emphasis on Yellowstar, but I want to set it up like this. So how Gambit had played over this period, like impressing everyone against the Koreans in Katowice and still doing the best of all the Europeans at the World Championships. Everyone thought in LCS, okay, they're losing a bit, but you know, like they don't live in Cologne, they're flying in, they're going to like pull it together in the playoffs and they'll still win the league, or they'll, you know, they were going to come top 2 for sure, it seemed. Well, the thing is, when you brought Yellowstar into your team, unfortunately, a lot of fans were just thinking, okay, well, he can enjoy playing there, but the second Rekkles turns 17, you know, later, it's like, it doesn't matter how well you do. But I've actually heard from almost everyone who's ever been a teammate of Yellowstar in my interviews, so the SK players, players from Fnatic, players from AAA, everyone like raves about Yellowstar as an AD carry. They say like some of them even have told me at certain points in time they thought he was the best in the world, maybe a bit crazy, but that this is how much they thought he was good. And obviously you're saying like maybe there was a mechanical difference in Rekkles, but some people have told me the difference is Yellowstar can like play call, he can help you like pick some bans and stuff. Like realistically, was it always the case that you would have had to change to Rekkles? If the team just kept winning with Yellowstar, could you have just kept Yellowstar? Is he that good? What's he good at? What's, you know, explain it that way for me.
It's very hard to judge on a player itself. I think coming into a new team doesn't make you the shot caller. With SK, he definitely was. Going to the regionals and into Worlds, he was the shot caller for SK. He set up a lot of picks and bans that they did, and he just generally like he made their team play what it was in that time. Coming to Fnatic, we had a really strong background on us. We were confident, we knew what we were doing, so we were not really like pulling him up into that position where he was in SK, where he was the shot caller. So maybe we would have not raised him to his full potential.
Should you have used him that way?
We could have, but at that time we didn't need to. Like, I think Source and me made a lot of calls there, and it was working for us in that way, and we didn't want to change a running lineup. We just wanted to take another AD in Rekkles spot and just try to keep it running or make it smooth. Picking him up as a AD carry, like simply because of the AD carry role, it made a slight difference. But bans and pick wise, we didn't really use him. I think we did a lot on our own, and he was not really involved in the ban and pick phase that much, like he was in SK for sure.
So based on your time when you were in Fnatic, because like I'm saying, winning the spring season was almost like the best possible result that could have happened, not just because you won, but because you even beat Gambit, the old Gambit, in best of 5. It just seemed like impossible, you know. So it seems like if you're Yellowstar, it's like, well, what more am I supposed to do to retain the AD carry? Based on what you know there, was it always the case you think that somehow Rekkles probably would have become in no matter what? Was there always like a time bomb waiting on the team, like eventually someone's going to have to go for this guy?
Whenever someone asked me that, I straight up said that I would never change Yellowstar for Rekkles just because of the sense that Rekkles is coming back. I think it would have not changed that much, and I would not change a running lineup with a new player, because it would have barely had the same impact it had on Katowice, for example. Taking a new player in makes the team play different. It's just a general thing that you have to adjust your gameplay to the players that play it. So a new player in will always slightly change it. So I think taking Rekkles in at that point would have made us step back for the first moment. It would have improved us long term, probably, but first of all, we would have made a step back in performance-wise, probably.
Because this leads into the obvious topic that I'm going to have to talk to you about in this interview, which is your removal from Fnatic. Because, okay, I do want to talk about it just in terms of you, or just in terms of the Fnatic players' relationship only with you, but the problem is there's the elephant in the room, which is Rekkles, basically, which is that at some point in time, it seems like even if everyone said, no, we'll try and keep Yellowstar, we like Yellowstar, he's an awesome player, all the rest of it, it seemed like at some point, someone in the team was going to have to leave if Rekkles was going to come in. And so when I first saw the story break as an outsider who knows nothing about what's going on inside the team, my first cynical reaction was, I bet they were sort of waiting for one person to do anything that could be an excuse, like, oh, sorry, you forgot to take the trash out, Rekkles has to come in and take your spot. Like, they had to find some way to get him into the team. Am I way off base with this?
I would say in that time we were underperforming. We were not doing as good as in the spring season. Like in the spring season we were doing really great. We were doing as good as Gambit. We were like on the top of the standing all the time, and we were competing with them on really a high level. I think doing worse made everyone believe we have to change something, and that change something was like leading towards finding a scapegoat. I a bit felt of it in that way. I would not blame my team for trying to make a difference or making a change, but I didn't feel like I was underperforming, and that was the reason we are losing, so I kind of feel like a scapegoat for it for sure.
Because the thing that seemed a bit suspicious, okay, is in general there's a rule, right, in team sports, there's your famous rule which says as long as a lineup is winning, you never change it until it's proven it can no longer win. As long as it's proven, then okay, make whatever changes. But if there's a chance it can start winning again, then obviously whatever little fix you need there you get all the experience still in tow, okay? And so in League of Legends, I've noticed this does seem to be correct, because I feel like Gambit proved this, because they would have the event or two where they'd do badly, but then once they figured it out again, they got right back to that level again, whereas you could see what a risk it is to try and bring in a new player. So under normal circumstances, I think if Rekkles wasn't involved in this, the team would think to themselves, well, we had our best result possible last season, we're still a top team, like let's figure something out to work through this. And I saw in your statement you seemed shocked, like they didn't ask me to like change something or give me a few weeks to switch things around. Do you get the sense that that's how the Rekkles thing impacted things, that otherwise there would have been a chance to fix whatever they say was wrong?
I think it was definitely fixable. Like if anyone had the sense that I was underperforming and playing really, really bad, and they gave me any kind of like, they told me I should play more solo queue, but that was mainly it, and I was not underperforming in a sense. I did one bad game against SK, and everyone seemed to kind of panic and say, okay, we need to change something, otherwise this will never work. And I think that this conclusion came more with the threat of Rekkles coming in or joining another team instead of staying in Fnatic. I think they saw him as a world-class AD as he was, because he was surely dominating the amateur scene in the entire time he was playing in it. But I think they kind of panicked instead of taking it calm and trying to improve. Like, I don't think I'm a bad player, or I really put up a really bad attitude towards anything. I rather think that I could have improved myself if I got more push from the team, and I didn't get that. I never felt stress, pressure, or whatever on me, because I felt like I was not underperforming. We were underperforming as a bot lane, but I always did my job in any team fight. I didn't miss position that much. I didn't get caught constantly like some other players would maybe have done. I think I did a really good job at playing my role, and I didn't really say I was the reason we were underperforming back then. It was more like a general thing in communication. We did bad calls. We didn't go for objectives. We didn't really raise up in the meta like we did before. And we also adjusted our gameplay more like towards the opponent than playing our game ourselves. And we started to get less confident, and being less confident makes you play like unstable as well. So I think we could have fixed a lot with practice, like general team practice, and there was not an individual mistake that led us towards losing the games. I don't think so.
As like a general principle, I really hate the idea of people trying to change positions if they're very good at one position. Because to me, if they're very good, it's possible they could be good in the new position, but it seems unlikely that they'll be better at a new position than they were at the one that was already suited to all their skill set, okay? And so we've seen in League of Legends, in general, it hasn't worked that often. It's worked in a few cases, but I've also noticed there's been very few cases where you've actually got to see how that would work on the top international level, because that's the problem, okay? Even if you do the change and the player is still good, well, when you go to the world level, you're now playing the best players in the whole world at that position as well on these different teams, you know. And so any little flaw is going to be magnified massively. So the problem that goes with this scenario is not only did they remove you from the team, it's not like they removed you and got a new support in. Here's another world-class support, you know, don't worry about it, we're going straight in. Instead, they took their AD carry, put him in the support role, and sort of figured, well, you know, once Rekkles comes here, he'll play support good enough that somehow this will work. But what confuses me about that is, I actually did an interview with Monte Cristo a few weeks back, and when I asked him to name his dream team of players from the West who could compete against Koreans, he picked you as the support. He didn't pick Edward, he thought like you were. So in his mind, you were the best European support. So in theory, they've given up the best European support, taken someone they're saying is not the best AD, putting him into support position. Like, explain this situation for me. How can this work? Am I wrong with these principles? Are they so hard and set in stone?
Nothing is set in stone. I think it depends on the team that you pick up and the general playstyle as well. I'm rather aggressive. Other supports run a defensive playstyle. For example, Nif plays really, really good, but he doesn't play as aggressive as I did. I always had this one step towards someone while Nif rather stayed defensive. That cost me maybe a death more, but it gave my AD carry a kill more. So I relied on my AD carry getting stronger and stronger, while I just somehow figured it out to be equal to the other support and getting slowly but surely ahead, because my team gets a stronger carry, and by time, also by levels, like the AD carry just got stronger and stronger. That was my general playstyle that I had a long time. Like before with Yellowstar, when he was stronger than any other AD carry, I just rely on my AD carry to be stronger, and I try to push him in a position where he's even stronger. So just to like snowball the advantage that I have from playing with this player. That was my general idea. And I think in a lineup that can work very well. I can never agree on Yellowstar sending Yellowstar to support. I think that has more personal reasons than it has play-wise reasons. I think that's not their idea to say, okay, Yellowstar is going to be the best support ever. I think no one of them would say that, but he can find himself into the role because he just generally knows what to do, and he will be a decent support all the time, I think so. But I don't think he will be outstanding towards other supports either.
Because this is the thing, okay, I want to set this up properly, because if I just ask you, well, should you be the support instead of Yellowstar and then Rekkles can come in AD, that's going to sound like a stupid question, because you're not going to be like, no, I'd rather not be on the team. But I'll ask it like this. So the setup I've given you there's people saying you're maybe the best European support. Yellowstar, we don't even know how good he's going to be internationally as a support. So if I had to put my money, I'd probably say take nRated. So in that case, why not explain to me why you think Fnatic wouldn't just think, okay, well, we want Rekkles, let's just straight up say we want Rekkles. Yellowstar, I'm sorry, we're going to have to remove you. You were not doing well. We'll bring Rekkles in. We'll have nRated still. Why not do it that way? What do you think their reasoning could be? I mean, you know these guys. Well,
the reasoning was clearly that they saw motivation issues for me. I didn't see them myself, never, because I was always dedicated to the game. I think I played less solo queue than the others did. They stepped up their terms in they stepped up their game in terms of practice and solo queue. They played a lot more than I did. There's no doubt about it. I should have played more maybe in that time. I can admit that. But I didn't get like the feeling that I necessarily need to play solo queue. I always played normals, ARAMs, whatsoever, but I didn't enjoy playing solo queue as a support on my own, because with the random AD, I will always have to do a different playstyle than I did before, and that makes me suffer, like in terms of team play when I play with my actual AD. And I was not dual queuing with Yellow that much either, like never did that. I don't know why, but like even in AAA times, we never really dual queued that much. It's just a general thing that we never like to play with each other in terms of solo queue. We just didn't do it. And even if we did, like we always struggled to do good. But as soon as we hit a competitive match, both of us were on the same level and we somehow managed to do it always good. I'm not sure what's that about, but that was mainly it. And I think they saw motivation issues because I was not playing more like they did. But I never actually played less than I played before. Like, seeing that, I didn't see a reason to play more than before either, because I was not underperforming at that time and I didn't see myself doing worse or being worse than before. So getting approached like that and getting told that my motivation is not enough and they think that it's better to change me is not a point where I can agree on. I'm sorry.
Okay, so to set this up in like a fair way, let me think how I would phrase this. Okay, so I actually have a lot of experience from covering Counter-Strike for so many years, another 5v5 team game, especially with European players. And the thing about a lot of European players, okay, that I noticed from like profiling them mentally, was that a lot of them aren't very confrontational in a direct manner, okay? So even if they have a teammate who they don't like or they think they should replace, they'll never just go to him and say, listen, I don't like you, I don't think you're good enough to be in this team and I want to replace you. Instead, what they'll do is they'll talk to another member in the team who they think might agree with them that they should remove that player, and if he agrees, then they go, okay, we've got two now all we need is a third person, because it's a 5-man game, remember. If we can get 3 people, then we can definitely get this guy removed, because the other 2 could in theory stand up and then it'd be a stalemate, you know. And so the idea is you also don't want to reveal your hand that you're going to want to kick someone out, because then if they end up staying in the team, like later on they may be like, oh, I'll kick you out the team now, you know. So there's all this politics that goes on in the background. Even when teams are friends and they get along and in public it all looks awesome and they all love each other. And so what annoys me is when I see, whenever a team, the organization explains why someone was removed, they make it sound so professional, like they had a computer that analyzed the situation, said, sorry, you must remove, and they were like, oh, well, that's business, we have to remove that player. And they'll always say it was a team decision, we all came to this decision, but that's actually logically impossible, okay? Here's why. Because for it to really be a team decision, totally, what would have to happen is all the players would come into a room, okay, and they'd say, we all know we have to remove someone, don't we? Yeah, well, I agree. On the count of 3, we'll all say the name of the person we have to remove, and then on all 3, they all say nRated. We all agree, nRated. Okay, team decision. He's out of the team. That's absolutely fair. But in reality, I think what happens, from my experience, is one player decides he has the spark of the idea. Okay, and like I say, he goes to someone else, and they either agree or he convinces them. So we're not going to ask you to name names or anything like that. But do you ever get the sense from your time in Fnatic, like, were you ever at risk of being cut in the past? Do you get the sense that there was a specific motivation cutting you as a team aside from just the Rekkles issue, or is it only that's in the background in your mind?
I never had the feeling I was personally bad with anyone in the team. Like, I always came along with them very well, and that's just not only a political answer to that, but I really came along with them, like any one of them. I never had the feeling I was bad with them. I was always respectful. Anyone was respectful towards me. So it was definitely not a personal issue, because I even asked, like, at the moment they replaced me, we had this team meeting, I asked them if there was any kind of personal issue coming up, and if I did anything wrong, if I was disrespectful towards anyone, and they clearly said no, it was not. So from that perspective, I don't think it was just one guy. It was just a general feeling that they had, that they needed to change something, apparently. That's my point of view from seeing these things. And I also asked, like, if they wanted me to stay and just give 250%, stepping up my game, playing solo queue all day long, if they would change and they would let me stay. But they said no in that point. It was too late. Maybe the flights were booked or something, I can't say it. But they said clearly no when I offered that, because my motivation was still the same as before, and I never felt like any threat on my back. So when I had that, I was actually approaching them saying, okay, I would want to step up my game in any term. So if you give me the chance to prove myself, I would do it, but they did not give me that chance.
So I have one question left on this topic, not directly though, as an abstract concept of removing someone from a team. So like I mentioned before, in general, it seemed like League of Legends, the results confirmed my idea that if you have a good team, you should try not to change players because you can always get back to being good maybe, or maybe there's less things to fix than there is to put in with a new guy who you bring in. But the problem is, this season of LCS is kind of making me look like I'm wrong, because every single team, almost, except Fnatic, ironically, every other team, when they were losing, they would replace a player, and almost immediately they would then become much better, either go to the top of the league or suddenly become much better. And so it seemed like it's the opposite now, and suddenly if you have any problems whatsoever, just replace a player, get a new player in, and you'll do really much better. Is there some weird reason? What do you think of this environment at the moment that's allowing this to happen? Is it something to do with the game that's changed?
Well, the teams that replace players are mostly new teams, or the ones that are starting to rise are new teams. That means the lineup was not very long together. They didn't really have the most, like, depending on the persons, the team play that they figured out for the players they had was the best. So let's say Mithy for Lemon Dogs was not the biggest change towards their gameplay, and it just gave them a huge motivation boost, taking someone new into the team and trying to race with that. And I think teams benefit from that definitely, but long term I think you're standing better if you're playing with the same players in a lineup for a longer time and try to improve by improving like everyone individually, and team play wise it's just growing together. And if you know how people react, you're actually able to judge on what they are going to do in a team fight, for example, and you're able to react faster than if you have to rely on calls. I mean, those calls can be good and the communication can provide what you need, but it's better if you just have this general knowledge and you have this point where everyone is on the same line, knows you want to engage, and when the engage happens, there's no hesitation but like instant follow-up for that. I think that's better if you have a lineup that stays longer together, that trains together, and that just grows together, instead of replacing a player and trying to change it by that.
The Fnatic lineup that you were last a member of with Yellowstar's AD, in beating Gambit in the final, in this best of 5, people who are watching the interview now, okay, will think of this season of LCS, and Gambit suddenly seem quite mortal, you know, they seem like just another good team. What they might forget is, going into that final, only 4 teams ever had even won an offline series against Gambit. They were like ludicrously good, you know, and if you beat Gambit, usually you had to literally outplay them. They weren't ever going to like just flunk the whole game, you know. So realistically, how good was Fnatic in this series? And was there some special secret to beating Gambit?
There was no real special secret in beating Gambit. To come to that, I think they were a very consistent team, and they didn't do a lot of mistakes, and their general team play was very good, and every single one of them was actually a player that understood his role in the game and how he was supposed to play it out. I think they were playing very strictly the same that they played before, but they were not changing their gameplay, I'm saying, but they were just playing the same over and over, but they're playing it on such a high level that was really hard to compete with. And I think the whole season we were doing new stuff, trying different picks, seeing what the enemies pick, finding a counter for that and just playing it out. And we made things work for us that didn't work for others, which was really good. For example, best example versus EG was the Blitzcrank top pick, with 2 hard engages, Leona and Blitzcrank, just hard engage versus a passive comp, just as a plain example for that. I think that was a really good point, was that we were very versatile, but against Gambit we decided to step away from that versatile gameplay, go into very standard gameplay, and just beat them straight up with that. And before, when we've played them, we were struggling because they were always ganking bot lane because they knew I was going to be aggressive, and I swapped from a complete aggressive support into a complete passive support, and they could not handle that fact. They made up their gank patterns, and Diamond wasted infinite time on bot lane because we were just not playing aggressive. And at a certain point we even played aggressive with a passive comp, so he had to change that playstyle again. We just forced them out of their comfort zone by giving them something that I didn't want to handle or didn't expect to handle. So they had to change their mindset, and they were not able to adapt quick enough. And we were just playing very consistently good, and we didn't do a lot of mistakes in that final as well, and that's the reason we won. I think Gambit played very, very well in that final as well. They didn't play worse than before anyhow. I think we just played better in that final.
When it comes to all-time great lineups in any team game or team sport, I have a theory that there's something to the lineup that maybe even the players within the lineup don't know. Like there's oftentimes there's like a chemistry or a communication that like doesn't even need to be said and just naturally works, and people work off each other in a special way. And so even though people will have heard this really famous saying that, you know, something is more than the sum of its parts, like you put the parts together but there's something else extra there, even though people have heard the saying a million times, fans still think to themselves, it's like they get mind fucked by the names. Okay, so they think, well, if Edward's gone, yeah, but they've still got Alexic, they've still got Diamond Prox, these great players, you know. You got to play against the M5 bot lane and Gambit when they were at their best, and now you've seen them since when they've had Darker and they've had Voidal, etc. What, aside from just, we don't want it to be that Edward left and he was the superstar, but what do they miss when he's gone? Like, what is it about the Gambit that's made them suddenly just drop?
Right now, I think this week especially, Voidal and Genja stepped their game up together. They started to be aggressive together and poke together, making these moves like as a unit. And before it was more like you had a support and you had Genja. Genja was farming, maybe he was harassing out of the range, but he was barely auto-attacking, he was barely using his auto-attacks to damage the enemy or to pressure them. He was rather caring for his positioning, not getting mispositioned, and just farm up as good as he can. And Edward, as an addition to that, was very aggressive. He was doing the poke on his own. He was making the calls. He was saying, I go in, follow up if they do that, and they were just following that, and it worked for them. And with Darker, for example, they tried to keep up that gameplay, which did not really work for them. And now with Voidal, like, they just overall like stepped up their game in terms of that, and just started to be more aggressive as a unit and try to attack more like together instead of letting the support harass and trying to win a lane by out farming.
Because when we talk about their bottom lane, when they had Edward, okay, it's easy for people to see Edward when he, especially once he started playing Thresh. Okay, now this is like a highlight champion. If you're a very good support, you can get like clips made of you, and suddenly people start viewing you as the star player. But in the early days, people used to think of Genja as like a star player who's very, very good at AD and innovating a lot of things. And so now that Edward's gone and now that Gambit's not doing as well, it's easy for people to try and blame Genja, okay? And he's already, because he plays passive, I've noticed fans never really like passive style. They love aggressive players even when they fail, because they think, oh, well, if he'd have succeeded, imagine how great it'd look. But passive play, it's less sexy, you know? Like, it's like, oh, I'm trying to outthink you and just win the little small gains, okay? But the thing is, I've always had a theory as well about partnerships in business or in life or music or whatever, where part of what makes them really good as well is also like an unseen thing. And it works like this, okay? Sometimes you have people who seem polar opposite, or they have different ideas about what they want to do, but by pairing them together, you sort of get them to do like one of those Venn diagrams, like those circles where there's a part that gets covered in the middle. And the idea is, okay, I want to do all this stuff over here. Well, I want to do the opposite thing over here. Okay, well, the one thing we agree on in the middle, let's just try and do that. And because it's two people who are smart players and agreeing on something they can both do, then you sort of get like the best of both of you out. And then as a result, sometimes you can be more passive, sometimes you can be more aggressive. And so it seems like that's a very simple way to categorize their bottom lane, okay? But now Genja gets a lot of criticism from people for being so passive, and a lot of fans actually try to claim that he's like one of the problems with Gambit. And yet I actually did an interview with Creaton where he told me he thinks like it's impossible to play versus Genja, even though he's like an amazing, really aggressive AD carry. He says like he's always in the right position, somehow it doesn't work like when you try to push in. So talk about like Genja as a player, and tell me, first of all, what do you think him and Edward had together? And since you're a support yourself, what does Genja need around him to make him a really, really good player? What does he need to help his impact as a support?
So Genja is a very solid player. He's never out of position. It's incredibly hard to catch him out of position. It's like if you play Blitzcrank, for example, it's like you're moving around while he is moving around, and he will always make these counter moves that make it impossible to get an angle to catch him. That's exactly what Creaton meant as well. It's like he tries to get him into a position, for example, Ezreal to land a skill shot on him, but Genja will never let that happen. It's just like he does it step back if he sees that he doesn't have an angle where he can protect himself, and it's just impossible to catch him. That's really hard to play against, and I think he needs an environment where he has a support that actually can always make that move forward, but overall stays so like consistently on the point where he's not able to be in any kind of threat. So both are like dodging, not dodging the aggressions, but dodging the possibility for the enemy to make any kind of engage on them. And I think he needs someone like that. I think Edward had a good clue like when to go aggressive and when to play rather passive and just zone. And I think he needs exactly that. He was very dependent on Edward's playstyle, and I think he needs someone similar to that.
Since so few teams in the West have ever actually got to play Frost, and MadLife is such a famous figure as a support, anyone who's played him, I always want to know, like, what was their experience like? What did you think? So you got to play against Frost. What was MadLife like from your perspective?
He was good. He was very good. I only had 2 games versus him. No, actually only one.
Maybe one, yeah.
One in IEM Katowice in group stage. It was basically, they cheesed us with Tarek Urgot, so I was not really able to say anything out of that. I heard he's a really good player, but me myself cannot prove that because I literally haven't played him on a champion where I could say the skill cap was so high that it really made a difference who played that character. I think Tarek is not that much like giving out those informations. I think he's very good, and if I see any kind of videos, the prediction skills he has and the general idea of how to play a champion, for example, his Alistar zoning is legendary in my eyes. Like, there's no one else that can do the same that he does at this point. But I've never really experienced it myself. I'm sorry.
So for this next section, I want to talk a bit about EG, okay? But I'm going to kind of test your mettle as an analyst here. I'm going to like put some questions to you. So before we talk about this EG, I need to get an expert opinion, because if I talk to any EG member, okay, they're obviously biased into saying stuff like, you know, we can fix things, things are okay, we're turning things around, oh, I changed something yesterday that's going to have an effect. But if I take all the personal stuff out and I just look at the results, you can see a graph where EG were top in the world, and then suddenly there's a big drop off. And now they're just sort of clinging on. What happened to EG from season 2 to season 3 without just saying, oh, it just changed, the meta changed and that's it? Like, what actually do you think specifically happened that made it just not work anymore?
I think EG as itself had a very passive playstyle that was benefited by the meta as well, playing champions like Anivia, Soraka, Maokai. It was very hard for enemies to push into the towers, and the dives and the aggressive playstyle was not really there to make any use out of the passiveness, like forcing early objectives, or there was not really anyone grouping. The game was very simple back then. The mind games were a lot weaker. I think coming into the Korea phase of EG made them really realize that their playstyle will not work in long term, and when they played against Koreans, they managed to stall games as well. But Koreans more and more figured out, okay, if you play really aggressive against them, get early towers, and you have a really high advantage, you can just dive them and they have nothing to hold. So I think at that point it was like they needed to change their playstyle, they needed to go out of their comfort zone, and that really made them like play weaker. They had to play a playstyle they didn't even want to play. Like, I felt that they always wanted to stall games. Like, no matter what, they would have stalled the game unless someone does a really bad mistake and someone of them, like Wicked or Froggen, just simply got ahead on their lane and went into that carry position where he was dealing so much damage that it was unbearable to handle in team fights, and then they just sieged or pushed or just hold the lanes even longer until they had like these small advantages that came from dragons or just picking up buff by buff or farming the jungle. Just the general meta that allowed them to play a playstyle where they felt most comfortable with, and giving their carries as much gold as possible, making them able to carry any game. I think that benefited them in their playstyle and back then. And going into the next games in, for example, OGN, they tried to do the same, but it was just not as efficient. And as soon as they came against Frost, they started to struggle playing the same thing.
Okay.
And it was barely the same at Worlds. I think everyone coming against EG had a clue what they're playing. They were very, very, very solid without many mistakes, but overall they played like a game that was not really in the meta anymore. They just played the old meta, but they played it on such a high level that they were able to compete with teams that played another meta at that time. But they really started to struggle, and because of that they thought about changing their playstyle and tried to adapt. And by adapting, they made themselves weaker because they were not in their comfort zone anymore. And I think that's a big deal. And they slightly start to switch to going for objectives and early aggression. And they feel more comfortable now than they did before. And because of that, just step by step, they will adapt themselves to the meta. And I think they can. Like, their individual skill is outrageous. Like some of their players are just like so far ahead of others, or are on the same level as any other good top lane, mid lane, whatsoever. And I think just having this step forward instead of a step backward, like trying to do risk benefit, for example, it's just they have to take that from time to time just to get benefits against teams that are actually playing the same play style. Or if they just try to play passive, passiveness can be put a penalty on very easily. And if you see that aggressiveness is hard to counter, why wouldn't you play it yourself? So step by step, I think they will improve by just adapting their own mindset to the meta.
Okay, I have another theory that I want to run by you, because you're an analytic guy who likes to think about the game. Okay, so tacking onto something you said at the end there about how passivity it has big penalties if you don't do it perfectly. That's the key issue. Okay, when you talk about aggressive playstyles and defensive playstyles, the reason why aggressive playstyles are so popular, aside from the fact they're a lot of fun to play, is because if you have a lot of skill, you're sort of playing off your skill, okay? And what you're doing is trying to like surprise the opponent or do something crazy where you have, in a short burst of the time, you're going to try and win this situation. And when that works, it's going to look awesome. When it doesn't, you can just forget about that and we'll try it again next time, okay? And so another reason why it's very popular, especially among fans and pros themselves, is because it allows teams who are worse to beat teams who are better by doing something really unexpected or some really big gamble, you know, that can work either way. Whereas to beat a team who's better than you, if you both play a very late game standard style, they're just going to beat you because they're going to gradually beat you through the game, you know, get small gains that at the end they'll be too far ahead. And so the thing is, playing the very passive style, if it's done perfectly, in theory, I think if computers played, would probably be the best style, okay? Because what you try to do is minimize all disadvantages, gain very small advantages, and at the end of the game, you'd have won without doing any big move, you know? So it means that at its peak, it looks awesome, but it's also the hardest to do. And I think of it like this: the aggressive aspect might rely on a short burst of skill, but the very passive style relies consistently on you making very smart decisions over and over and over and over and over and over. And if a few of them go wrong, you kind of lost maybe the gains that you'd made before. What do you think on this topic?
I think it's very, very situational, so to say. Gaining advantage by passiveness, like getting objective after objective, allows the enemy to have time window to farm up as well. And if you don't consistently get a lot of advantage, basically, the advantage that you gained before like vanishes. Because let's say you have a 10k gold at minute 5. If you have a 10k gold lead at minute 60, it's not gonna matter. That's what I mean. Like, if you don't consistently gain a lot of advantage, I think you will run into lineups where they just punish you for doing that. And it's not very easy to punish that, and it's very hard to execute that playstyle. So I can see a reasoning why someone doesn't play, because they are not able to consistently avoid mistakes. Because at a certain point they will do mistakes and that will backfire and the enemy team gets ahead, and all of a sudden the passive playstyle doesn't work for you anymore. I think it's very hard to execute a passive playstyle against someone that really aggresses you and tries to force things, like contesting buffs. If you leave them the buff and say, okay, I go passive, I rather farm this instead, but they take their own as well, you have no like evasion points. You cannot just swap to another objective that is not there. Like, there are limited amounts of objectives in the map. And if you give up some of them because you decide to play passive, don't take the risk of risking a fight there and just like taking it, you're not trying to contest it, because contesting would be an aggressive move in that case. You just give up advantages that you should not, and I think that can backfire very hard. For example, going from a blue buff steal into a tower dive, into a tower, into a Drake. 4k gold lead in the game is over in early game. That's basically the game right now. And if you have a passive playstyle, that means you try to take whatever you can, but you basically don't risk a fight if someone tries to contest, then that kind of counters itself. Like, so going into the meta saying, okay, I will not contest, and enemy says, okay, I'm going to contest, that means you give up advantage right from the way, just stepping into the game with a disadvantage, saying that you cannot contest your own buffs, for example, which is definitely an aggressive move. Like, even if you try to move but don't risk a fight, it always puts you in a risk, or puts you situationally in a point where you might make a mistake by moving to a position where you shouldn't, or someone waits in the brush for you because they're not actually assisting the guy taking the buff but waiting for you to come out. So you always have this problem saying, okay, I have to actually give up some of my own resources in order to play passive, but it can be punished in so many different ways that you're actually not able to. You have to, at a certain point, you have to step up and say, okay, you cannot take that buff from me because this is my buff and you're in my territory, and if you do that, you die for it. But passive playstyle is consistently saying, okay, I take the least risks possible, but going against someone aggressive, it forces you into taking risks, basically. Otherwise, you give up stuff that you cannot. It was the same that I said against Koreans. Like, if you play passive against them, you get out-farmed, you get consistently outplayed with it, and at a certain point, they just have this much like gold more and advantage more that they snowball from that and win the game. So you have to go aggressive, you have to play very demanding and saying, okay, I contest everything I can, every single buff whatsoever. And at that point, you force them into positions where they might not want to end up with, and you can get benefits from that as well. Even if you don't necessarily get the buff, you might get a kill that snowballs a lane, the lane gets maybe a second kill and the game is over. So playing passive in this meta against people that actually understand the game and try to gain advantage by contesting things they can. Like if they see a matchup, okay, matchup is jungle Lee Sin versus Maokai, then they can say, okay, Lee Sin can take anything he wants because it's like barely impossible to catch him. It's just a general thing, like passive playstyle against aggressive playstyle always can get benefits for the aggressive playstyle if it's executed well.
Because this seems like a good point of contrast between the Fnatic team you're in and now the CG team you're analysing, because when I think of the Fnatic team, one of the things people always talked about as a strength was the split push. And so the idea is identifying the point in certain games where, okay, we actually can't let this composition of the opponents get to the late game because then they have the big advantage, or we're losing the game anyway, and if we just keep playing standard, we're going to just lose. That's what the end trajectory is. So we have to kind of pick this is the moment now, and we have to go and do something else. Is this like an accurate description, do you think?
Yeah, I think at a certain point they were just like, they get a kill, but they're like pushing the wave or trying to freeze still, or they're trying to take a tower instead of transition into buff or Drake. They just saw these limited amounts of actions that they can do without, like, let's say, taking a risk or losing something. Pushing bot lane out is always a possibility. The enemy loses 5 CS, but let's say you push with the jungle, you push faster, you put stronger, and then you take the turret. It's early 150 gold, and it will... You might end up losing Drake, or you might end up losing time, or the jungle cannot farm as much, but in the end it like gives the team a global benefit, a reward, and it's way more important to do those kind of stuff. Or let's say they were always playing reactive in a way. That's what I tried to change the first. They were always like, okay, you push a lane over them, so Snoopy will go for that lane and try to hold it, the tower. But instead I say, okay, if he goes bottom, why don't you transition 3-man mid and take a turret as well? So you say turret for turret, instead of trying to contest, maybe losing half HP of the turret, but you actually don't gain anything. The benefit was not there. It was just trying to not lose as much as you could. So holding a tower with a support and jungle, instead of trying to 3-man push a tower as well and putting aggression on them, instead of staying passive and trying to hold. That was the first thing I was trying to change. Like, that was a big point.
So there was an interesting strategical development, okay, in the last season of OGN Spring, and actually the commentator Monte Cristo wrote an article about it. I don't know if you saw it. It was about called the 6-man, like this wave push. And so anyway, as a total layman, I'm going to give my version of it, and I want you to comment on it. So basically, what it sounded like, it went along the lines of this, okay. There was a point in the game at which CJ Blaze had figured out that they could give up something. I think it was like they wouldn't contest the dragon or something, and they would let the other team take the dragon, but they would use that time to specifically farm Ambition and Blaze, their 2 carries, like as much as they could up. And what they'd calculated was, okay, the other team takes the dragon and thinks, awesome, we get like the gold and everything, but they'd figured they got like a similar amount of gold, but they, instead of giving it to all the team, they're giving it to the specific carries and then making them carry the game later on. Now this sounds, when you explain it like that, like, wow, it's genius, like no one else really saw that. Is it really the case that this is like a one-off strategy? Are people coming up with these sorts of innovations all the time? And is it really only Korea that's doing it? Do the Europeans understand the game in a similar sense to this, do you think? Yeah,
we definitely did the same at IPL. We just said, we managed to question everything we did and try to form it in a different way. I have an example. For example, you make a lane push, both side lanes, they are pushed towards you because they pushed and wanted to base. So you start pushing it, but you leave 2 range creeps more on each side lane. So at that point, you grouped up mid lane, you formed a team, and you 5-man push them, which means the side lanes will slowly but surely stack up a huge minion wave that goes into the turret, which creates immense pressure for anything. And let's say you have a blitzcrank and you have this engage that is always there, this threat. They will not be able to take the side lanes and defend that. You do that a couple of times, 2 or 3 times, and you're able to transition that into outer turrets, which means they always give up advantage while you give up a little bit of farm, because you get disadvantage by just leaving lanes pushing. But in the end, you transition that into a global objective that helps the whole team. I think that mindset, of that changing mindset, that questioning yourself, is not only Korean based, that's also European. And I think with coming up more professionalism, for example LCS now, and not only tournaments themselves, I think a lot of teams starting to develop that. But you need to have a general understanding of the role and the game in order to do that, to question what is set basically as a rule set.
Another thing that I think, here's a perspective I have on how esports games are, okay? There are many different levels that you can think about the game on, from the most simple of like what this champion's doing to that one, to like the strategy of the 2 teams, to like how it influences the metagame, to how even ideas that aren't connected to the game themselves interact, like how aggression meets passivity or premeditated act, etc. There's all these different levels, okay? And the problem with the levels is each person who sees the game on one of these levels, if they don't look further into the game, all they'll see is that level, and as a result, they'll interpret everything through the lens of that level. So if they only look at you could, to be rude, some fans only look at what their star player does. They just watch him and they just look at oh, he won the game by doing that, he lost the game by doing this. Whereas maybe someone who's like a team leader and a shot caller, he's not even worried about what the star players do. He knows like they play similarly each game. He's looking at the overall strategy or something. And you keep going like this, okay, the different levels. And so one of the reasons this frustrates me is I think even pros get caught up in this sometimes. And so pros have this thing, right, where every day they're sort of tunneled into like a 1-day version of their career, because they're thinking, today what can I do to improve myself, and what did I do wrong yesterday? And so they have a habit, okay, where they're almost superstitious. When they're doing well, they just think to themselves like, okay, I've got to just keep doing whatever I'm doing now and do that. And then when they're doing badly, as in just losing, they will often blame it on I'm playing badly, or I just don't feel right at the moment, or something's wrong here. But what they're not doing is they're not actually acknowledging the strategical plane of this existence, okay? And so what might have happened is, this is why I'm going to reference EG, is their actual overall style may no longer be viable, or teams might have a better counter to it. And what happens is, even if you play godlike, if your overall style conceptually is losing to theirs, in the long run you're going to lose to them, and they're going to beat you more often. But if you don't acknowledge that, then you're going to keep saying, no, well, my skill level's fallen off a bit, I don't play enough solid, whatever the reason is, okay? And so the reason why I'm going to bring this up is because it's another way to contrast Fnatic and EG, okay? Because the 2 mid laners, the star mid laners of xPeke from Fnatic and Froggen from EG, so they almost have inverse periods where they're at their peak, okay? Because you have Froggen, who's the beast in Season 2, and because CLG is doing really well, everyone acknowledges, oh, he's awesome, he's playing godlike here. Then when EG is doing badly, they say, oh, you know, he's not playing as well as he used to, he's not as effective. Vice versa, when no one cared about Fnatic and when they weren't doing well at tournaments, you know, they'd forgotten all about xPeke. They were all about like Seitz, they're all about Froggen, all these guys. But now suddenly, because Fnatic's doing well, they're like, oh, I always thought xPeke was the best mid, he's the best all the time. And so thinking of it in this sense, how can you reasonably compare these 2 players, like their impact on the game, how good they actually play? Because I mean, I'll just go up and say it in this interview, I still think Froggen to this day plays just as well as he ever did in Season 2. I think the guy's incredible. Like, in fact, the difference between the 2, I think, is xPeke has an awesome style for fans. If he ever does anything good, it looks so like cool and sexy. Like, you're obviously going to think, oh, it's so awesome. Whereas the Froggen, again, it's like, it's not as sexy. It's like he's like, what amazes me about him is he sort of grinds you down with like just mechanical brilliance, like gradually stacking up a little lower. So compare the 2 in this sense, and like, what do you think of this? Has one of them really gone up and down? What do you think?
I can compare it pretty well, since I see Froggen now from another perspective. Before, it was just a really good mid laner for me. Like, bottom line, he was just one of many really good mid laners compared to Alex and so on. If I see him now, like standing behind him or watching him in scrims and see what he's doing, he's exceptional. Like, his mechanical skill is exceptional. I cannot say it anyhow different. I haven't had the honor to play with a lot of players that have this much skill on their side than him. I think Peke has an insane amount of skill as well. He's like an insane player overall. He's versatile. He can make basically any champ work for him, which is like a really big plus on him. I think Froggen can make a lot of champs work as well, but not on the same level xPeke can. Okay. But when you see these peak champs, like if he mains a champion Froggen and he does it to the perfect, like to the best point where you can actually play him, like to the mechanical limits, I think Froggen has an edge on xPeke simply because skill-wise, Froggen is just exceptional. Like I have not any player that I can ever compare him to, because I've played with him a time before he was actually in CLG, when he was playing like AD Tristana mid lane, his best example. And he was just randomly playing stuff on like casual, more fun, but he was playing a lot. And you just saw that this guy has potential. I saw it from the first moment I played with him that he has potential, and I couldn't really explain why, but right now it's like his dedication is unlimited, and he just doesn't only enjoy it, but he has this mindset that he always wants to be best, and he doesn't like to be questioned himself at all, because he knows what he's doing. He really knows what he's doing. When it comes to mid lane, he knows how he has to push a minion wave, so it ends up in a position where it's beneficial for him. He pushes 2 minion waves into the tower and says, okay, when they come back, like I can freeze them around here. So if I get them into the position, I might be able to kill that guy. Just like things that other mid laners might not know. He has an edge on them. He can predict how minions will run and where they will stand and how he has to freeze them. And beside that, he's just like taking last hits, not missing skill shots. Just the general play and decision making that he has that just makes him the player that he is at the moment. And I think coming from season 2, where he was an outstanding player as well, but I think he has not lacked any kind of skill towards now. The only thing that has changed is the meta, and you cannot give him that many resources that you did before. Basically, before it was Wraiths into mid lane, into Wolves, into mid lane, into Wraiths, which means you just have this idea of you just farm and farm and farm, and you get bigger and bigger and bigger, and by that you can just carry while the support stays significantly lower and you cannot farm that much up. And you were not able to farm as much as you could in mid lane by farming top lane golems, for example. So the mid lane was a position that changed in that way, that you cannot just simply get as much farm as you could before. So he's not in the carry position that he was before, because he doesn't have simply the resources. He cannot do that. If he plays very, very passive, the other mid laner will constantly go gank other lanes and get so much benefit on the other lanes and by kills or pressure or turrets that actually the team will lose if he does that. So he cannot play like that. He is actually roaming more than other mid laners at the moment, which means that he gives up a lot of opportunity to farm just to get benefit for the team. And that's why it seems like he cannot carry as much. But if you see the matches, he's never doing bad. He doesn't really have a bad game. He always manages to farm up equally or more. Like you rarely see a game where he's behind in CS towards another mid lane. And even though the skill has raised in any position right now, in any team, and the dedication to the game that others provide right now is getting higher and higher, and people are trying even more to be the best in their position, I think even then he's still, compared to others, a small step ahead.
When people talk about the metagame, I have an interesting way of explaining it, okay? In League of Legends, and also actually in StarCraft 2, funnily enough, the term metagame means something very different to what I used to call it. Because the games I used to follow for a long time, okay, Brood War, Quake, and Counter-Strike, hadn't been patched for about 10 years. So when we said metagame, we literally meant how the strategies are developing among the players. Whereas in League of Legends and StarCraft 2, these games are patched and updated regularly and buffed and nerfed and stuff like that. So as a result, metagame also in these communities tends to mean things like specific changes to a weapon or a champion or something like that. And that's what a lot of people talk about when they say the meta, okay? And so the reason why I bring this up is because there's an element that I've always felt like was a bit lacking in terms of how people analyze the regions of the world in League of Legends, okay? And it goes like this. When people talk about the European players, they always say, oh, they just have the best mids in Europe, and they can't just leave it there as though like, well, they just grow out of trees. Mids just grow out of trees here. And in China, oh, they just have the best ADs. I guess, you just find ADs everywhere. Whereas to me, the reason it makes sense that both of those regions have one player that's really godlike there is because yes, they have very good players in that position, but also because they have enough good players, like say you get the first few in place, say you get like 3 or 4 good ADs in China and 3 or 4 good mids in Europe, that then means in terms of that one region, if we put it into a bubble and they only exist playing each other, if you now play against Froggen and Alexich and xPeke, well, if your mid isn't really good, immediately you're going to have a huge problem right there. You're probably going to lose the game outright. You're giving up something immediately. So that means you have to get a good mid player to have the chance to face him. Whereas in another region without as many good mid players, you can get away with not having as good a mid player. So it's almost like you're pre-selecting all the best mids to definitely have to be in the top teams, and yet that position has to be filled. Likewise in China, their play is so AD heavy, even in a weird sense, where it's almost like the junglers almost don't even gank very much there because they themselves know that they like to have their AD carry the game at the end. So it's like, again, a weird meta there. And so the reason why this is interesting is because I actually have seen in games where you didn't patch it that the metagame kind of worked that way, because what happens is when teams are successful, the other teams copy whatever formula they use for the success. And the difference is in other games it can cycle around, but obviously there's the effect of like the patching changes League of Legends in that sense. So when we talk about this, the reason I framed it like this is because it makes it hard to compare a mid from Europe and take him out of Europe, and then compare a mid from America and take him out of the context of America, and then compare him to a mid in Korea, you know. Because really the bubble they exist in is so radically different. And so an example I thought of this was everyone raves at the moment about Cloud9's Meteos, okay? But when I looked up the stats on the champions he played, he was playing champions who in Korea, he played Nasus 10 times in jungle. In Korea, in all of OGN, Nasus was picked twice, and I'm not even sure if those are both jungle. And so this is a totally different world he's playing, of players he plays against and what he can do. How would you explain to people the meta of Europe, because you come from this place with all these mids, etc., and because you've played teams from all over the world, this problem in comparing before you actually see them in the real match, you know, comparing in your mind, essentially?
Defining the term meta is very hard for me, I think. It's like a general thing that teams rate champions over other champions. That has to do with their own play style, with which champions are mained, which champions are played. And I think each region and each team competing against each other rates champions higher depending on the team they face and their own comfort zone, of course. But as soon as you're comfortable on a champion, it gets a higher value for the other team. So there will be some rivalry going on, competing for that champ. That forms basically the meta. That's the idea is the patches come in, make a champion like more successful or less successful, stronger or weaker, and depending on that, it's like, is it worth picking it up or not? And overall, it's just the general decision making. If you face certain teams with certain champs, is the champ overpowered or not? You will see each region plays a certain champ, Zac for example. So Zac is overpowered. Zac will be the meta. Zac is in the meta. The plays that are made are dependent on what the enemy tries to do. If you go for very passive lane, you try to go very late, and you're playing that out very solid, and other teams try to copy it like it was before, it will be the new meta, and that's only in your region. I think each region has only the chance to compete with each region because you don't have the necessary tools to go with the same latency towards North America or Korea, otherwise we would have a worldwide competition. It's very hard to say if there's a mid lane that is better than another mid lane if you don't let them compete against each other, and challenges and competitions basically make players grow, and the personal skill that you have is not only measured on yourself but on people challenging you. If you're not getting challenged, if you're not getting beaten, you cannot improve by yourself on your own. It's like, for example, mid lanes in Europe. If there are good mid lanes in Europe that actually discover things for themselves and try to improve by that, and then they meet someone and, oh my god, that guy beats me with that strategy, then he will pick it up for himself, look it up and see, okay, that guy does that different, and I will try to do it myself, make it work for me, adapt his play style or what he did for me, and grow by that. So the players actually grow by the challenge that they have in each region. So depending on how much challenge there is, there will be a better meta, or there will be different champions played, or the mid laners will be stronger, the AD carries will be stronger. China has probably best AD carries because the challenge for AD carries is the highest there. Mid laner probably has better, Europe has probably better mid laners at the moment because the challenge for mid laners is just bigger here, as you said, that a team with a good mid laner against a team with a bad mid laner starts with its disadvantage, unless you swap lanes up and make it a 2v1 lane, for example, just to counter or to prevent any matchup that comes there, and just try to farm equally and get an advantage by that you say, okay, my mid laner is worse than their mid laner, but they farm equally, so in the end it will just turn out to be an equal matchup. It's always working, but it's always like depending on the region where you are and how many good players you have in your position, and by that you can grow. If a bot lane is very strong, I will look at them and see, hey, they're doing stuff like that, maybe I can counter it like this, and by that I challenge them as well to change their playstyle. Otherwise, if they don't adapt, at a certain point I will just consistently beat them. It's like a very simple example for that. I think any position in any region can improve on itself if they have more players that keep challenging and keep adapting and keep growing in their own role. That's a really big thing, and the bubbles themselves break up as soon as you see any international competition, and there it is when you actually are able to say, okay, this region is better than the other one. But even there you can question if you're able to say which region is better, because of the possibilities. For example, Korea has a lot more teams, amateur teams, and just the whole scene in Korea is way bigger, and the competition there is way bigger. That means it's easier for them to grow than in Europe, for example, where, let's say you want to replace a player, you don't have that many young players coming up and having the same skill level or the same individual skill that you need to just challenge constantly or try to improve yourself. And if you don't have this pressure from coming from the sides and from up to improve yourself, it's very hard. It's very hard to do it by yourself. That's why some regions start growing faster and slower. A really good example is as well NA LCS. Before NA, I think, was a very, very weak region, and now with LCS, with getting more professionalism, more focus on the game, and more teams trying to compete to get into LCS to make a living out of it, if it gets attractive from that point, people start to focus more on it and do a lot more, and that's why teams come up. Comparing each jungle from another region to another jungle, like comparing the old inSec to now Meteors, is something you barely can do. They don't have the same champion pool, they're not facing the same opponents, so comparing the KDA from OGN to NA LCS is probably not going to be the best. And also KDA is not a right example for saying, okay, this KDA means he's doing good. No, if he has a higher KDA than his teammates and he's doing very bad with his team, that means he individually did not do as bad as his team did. So it's just a measurement for individual performance under a certain circumstance, winning or losing.
Okay, so for my final question, I always do a hypothetical. Okay, so here's the way I thought of it for you. So the aliens come to Earth. This time, instead of being aliens, they're going to kind of like side with Korea here, okay? So they're going to take the Korean All-Star team from the All-Star event. And if you look at this lineup, okay, they're going to say, you know, for the Western society to survive in this world that we're going to create, they have to prove that they're good enough by beating this Korean All-Star team that, you know, wiped the floor with everyone else. And the thing about this Korean All-Star team that we've noticed is, yeah, they have like great players, but the one key that nearly all of them have is that they're very mechanically strong, all their players. And so we know in the West, you know, mechanics versus mechanics probably isn't going to be the best idea. So instead we want nRated to put together a team of Western players where for every position it's like the smartest or the most analytical player at that position. So who would you pick for this team?
So not player wise, but analytical.
Just their mind for the game at that position.
Okay, AD Genja. I think there's not much more to say. He's knowing a lot about the role and himself. Diamond Prox in the jungle, he's innovating, he's changing his playstyle, he's doing a lot more than others do. Froggen, individually probably one of the smartest players I've ever played with as well. And top lane probably Soas. He understands the role pretty well as well, and he just understands a lot more about the game than other top laners do.
Do you have a final message, someone you want to thank or say hello to?
Well, thanks to everyone that supported me. I was going through a really rough time after Fnatic, and especially EG has backed me up. Even without any offer going to them, they backed me up as friends and just said that they didn't agree with the decision, and they were offering me even a couch to crash on if I needed one. So I really have to thank them for the opportunity to be with them, and I'm really proud of being with them as well.
Danke.
Danke.